Hello and welcome. Welcome to Everything is Energy and welcome to the weekly astrology forecast. This is for the week of August 23rd through August 29th, 2026. And we are arriving at the other side of August's eclipse portal. Caveat that just because we're arriving at the other side of this portal in linear time and space, this is stuff that we're going to be unpacking for the next 6 months. So let's remember that 2 weeks ago, the Leo solar eclipse opened a new cycle, and that cycle was around creativity, courage, identity, and you know, the unique, authentic light that we're here to bring to the world. That's the essence of the heart energy of Leo. And this week we arrive at the counterpart for that solar eclipse. We have a lunar eclipse with the full moon in Pisces. And that happens on the night of August 27th for most of us, although for some of us, those of us on the East Coast, that will creep into the morning of August 28th. Creep might be the wrong word. That will blossom into the morning of August 28th. So, let's compare the energy at the top of this forecast. And I'm just going to say I'm going to get through some of the aspects of this week, but I'm starting with the eclipse because I did a whole podcast on it. I'll link that in the notes. It's absolutely the stamp of the energy for this week. But I want to tie it to the larger picture of what's going on. So the Leo eclipse a couple weeks ago asked us what wants to be born through us authentically from our heart space. Now we have a Pisces lunar eclipse. So Leo solar eclipse north node, Pisces, no, south node, Pisces lunar eclipse north node. And the Pisces lunar eclipse north node is asking us, what are we ready to release so that whatever wants to be born through us that may have been keyed up with the Leo eclipse can take place. And I think that's the larger story of this week. The Sun and Mercury have both entered Virgo, and this brings us back to the practical details of our lives. Virgo helps us focus on our body, our routines, our work, our habits, our health, and really the moment to moment ways that we care for things that are valuable to us. And so at the same time, we're remembering that some things need to be surrendered. Some things simply need to be allowed to dissolve. And this week seems to move between, two kinds of wisdom, and that is the wisdom of discernment and the wisdom of surrender. And so let's go ahead and walk through this together. I'm going to start at the top of the week. I'm going to start with Sunday, August 23rd. And this is a day of, really kind of the things in the ordinary world being the healing essence that we might need. And for us to realize that it's not out there somewhere, that we already have, we have the tools to work with. So, we begin this week. The sun is newly in Virgo, and it's forming a trine to Chiron, which is pretty freshly into Taurus, if you remember. And I love this aspect as an opening of eclipse week because both of these signs, Virgo and Taurus, are earth signs. And after the intensity of the Leo eclipse, we're being brought back into the physical world, especially into our body. And Virgo, as I mentioned, invites us to notice, asks us really to notice the details. Whereas Taurus is asking us to notice what actually nourishes and sustains us. And together, especially on Sunday, but this is kicking off the week, the sun in Chiron is reminding the sun and Chiron, excuse me, the sun in Virgo and Chiron in Taurus are reminding us that healing doesn't always need to take place through these exclamation point extraordinary experiences. Virgo and Taurus are just very much are wanting us to think about what's root chakra, what's around us already. Maybe it's, something that's really nourishing for us. Maybe it's being outside in nature. Maybe it's attending to something. Maybe it's simply deciding to take a rest. And I think it's just such a beautiful expression of opportunity for us to find something simple that we can do. As I mentioned, it's already around us. This doesn't have to be something that is outside of us that we have to go make an extraordinary experience of. While those are also, they have their place and they are absolutely beautiful. But what's happening on Sunday is that, they're reminding us that there's this way for us to find healing in the things that help us to feel like home. Monday, August 23rd, today's a day for listening to the energy, listening beyond the things that are obvious. Mercury is still traveling through the very final degrees of Leo today, and it's forming a biquintile, which is a creative aspect with Neptune. And it later is going to encounter Saturn today through a more challenging sesquiquadrate. And so there's really kind of this beautiful note of tension here because Neptune is planet of illusion and delusion, but it opens our imagination. By contrast, Saturn asks for discernment. And so while one part of us may be dreaming, another part of us wants to know whether that dream can actually really be created in the physical world. And I hope that you can sense that we need both of those things. We need the dreams, we need the intuition, we need the imagination, we need the inspiration. We also need to exist in the here and now and to be able to take those steps that we can to put the tax in that we can so that we can mm, take that the imagination and put it into the 3D world. So I think there's moments that our intuition really gives us information that our logical minds can't give us, and that is the benefit of intuition. But our intuition, and this is an interesting thing to think about, and this is just my offering, but I think our intuition really benefits from patience, especially as we're in this collective moment, remembering absolutely what our intuition is for many of us and how to trust it. One of the questions I get a lot when people are kind of starting to get intuitive hits and starting to be able to read energy is how do I know what's intuition and how do I know what's my fear or what's just something that's from the past or something that's nonsensical. And one of the keys to this is time. Not time, but patience, because intuition exists beyond time. I say patience because if your intuition is really absolutely giving you a hit on something or a hint on something or a realization, I think a lot of us have this grasping thing of, I think I got it. I think I need to act on it now. Well, yes, but also one of the things I like to tell folks is sit with it for a little bit. If it's still there the next day and the next day, absolutely, it's probably still something that is worth your awareness and your energy. So, long-winded way of saying, I'm talking about Monday right now, and I just kind of want to say that if something arrives today or around the beginning of this week, if it's an idea, a feeling, a hit, a hunch, some intuitive understanding, we don't necessarily need to decide that we have to discern everything that it means. And that's interesting for us. We can let it unfold. Absolutely pay attention, maybe even write it down, but let it breathe. Let it start to unpack itself because a lot of times there's even more that's there. And sometimes, the wisdom might arrive before we're fully ready to understand it. Let's move on to Tuesday, August 25th. This is a day of potentially changing, our perspective. Today, Mercury is at the final degree of Leo and it's opposing the North Node, which is at 29 degrees of Aquarius. And this is right before Mercury is going to cross into Virgo. And so in right before that happens, right after that happens. So first thing that happens is Mercury is in opposition to the North Node, and then it goes into Virgo on Tuesday, and then it immediately forms a trine with Chiron and Taurus. And so that is quite a transition. And I want to kind of talk about this because I think Mercury in Leo has been helping us to find the language of the heart and to really, one of the things that Mercury does that, other outer planets that also deal with communication, aka Uranus, especially, Mercury is about 3D fundamental communication. And, Mercury's been helping us to really merge what we know energetically in our heart and to begin to put words into that. What is uniquely ours to express and what is our truth? But the North Node in Aquarius is asking us to absolutely widen the lens here. So if Mercury in Leo is about this fundamental 3D communication, and that's important, North Node is why our soul's here in this lifetime. Aquarius is especially with Pluto and Aquarius, this is a big collective transition, transformation energy right now. And so, how does our voice want to participate in something larger might be the question. And even like what happens to my own personal story when and as it's encountering the collective story. And those are not those can be challenging questions. Those don't need to be questions that we have a hard and fast answer to. They're just questions that we're being invited to entertain today. So, and then in the same day, Mercury's entering into Virgo, and the tone's gonna change as Mercury shifts into Virgo. So we're moving from heartfelt expression towards discernment and observation. And there's this theme of, wanting to look more carefully and communicate more carefully and receive communication more carefully. And Mercury's immediate trine to Chiron in Taurus is suggesting that, you know, the act, and this is what's so special about Virgo, I think, especially Virgo is really the things that the act of being Virgo is the thing itself. So the act of paying attention can be all we need to be doing for the healing. And maybe when we pay attention, we can understand something about our own body. We can find the language for something that we've been feeling for a while. Or maybe we can recognize a pattern that's been quietly influencing our choices. And so Virgo reminds us also that we don't need to solve everything all at once, that, Virgo loves clarity. And clarity is a really powerful word because clarity is a really powerful concept. Because if we remember that our consciousness is it's everything. And when we harness what we're focusing on, when we get clear, that's all we need. And so this is a really wonderful gift to have Mercury in Virgo. It's a gift to have Mercury in Leo, but I think it's transitioning right on time. Of course it is. Let's move on to August 26th. And I kind of just am calling this the edge of surrender because the 27th is the eclipse day, but we're kind of beginning to really move up against and into directly this eclipse energy. We've been feeling it for quite some time now. But we have today on Wednesday, the sun, which is in Virgo, is forming quincunxes, which are challenging aspects. That really the thing to note about quincunxes is there might be an adjustment required. There's two quincunxes that the sun in Virgo is forming. The first is Pluto in Aquarius, and the second is Neptune in Aries. So these are both transpersonal planets. Pluto and Neptune and Uranus are absolutely exceptionally expressive and influential this year. But with these quincunxes right now, before this eclipse, something might not quite fit. And it's okay if that's a little bit uncomfortable. Because if we reflect back on the larger wisdom, and the eclipse in Pisces is going to remind us about the larger wisdom here in a moment, that even if we're uncomfortable and we don't understand, that doesn't last forever. So Virgo wants to understand, right? Virgo wants to discern, to improve, to organize. But Pluto is saying, as is Pluto's wont, dig deeper beneath the surface. There's more to discover. There's more to uncover. And Neptune is a planet that, is just nebulous is the word that came through during something I was doing earlier this week. And Neptune is the planet of illusion and delusion. And so Neptune reminds us of this ephemeral space, and that is absolutely where magic can happen. And so, I think that Neptune just wants to say that it's okay that we might not be able to understand everything just yet. And this really, as I was mentioning, feels like the absolute perfect preparation for the Pisces eclipse, because one of the great lessons of the Virgo Pisces axis, which is we're kind of clearing up that axis, this eclipse, is learning the difference between what can be changed through conscious effort and what must eventually be surrendered. So there are things that we can tend to, and there's things that we have to release. And there is absolute wisdom in discerning and understanding and getting clarity in the difference between those two things. So today I would just say, notice where you might be trying really, really, really hard to have something make sense, as is just part of the human condition. Pat yourself on the back. We're all playing that game right now. We want things to be organized and understandable and controllable. And, maybe the clarity isn't available yet. Maybe the invitation right now is, as I mentioned, to simply stay in the moment and to stay present. So let's get to the big theme of this week, and that is the Pisces full moon lunar eclipse. And this is where discernment meets surrender. This is the heart of this week. I'm going to talk about this for just a brief moment here in this weekly forecast. I'm going to point you to my podcast where I do a super deep dive about those topics. I'm also going to suggest, if you want to go deeper, to join my email list so you can check out the live gathering that I did where I add herbs and ritual and things that we can do to really interact with this energy of the eclipse this week. Those are all free tools that I have for you guys to support you, especially this week. But I love merging herbs with astrology and helping everybody to understand that that is absolutely part of the medicine that we need. So let me stop jabbering about that and get to what we're going to be looking for or dealing with or merging with. Let's first also realize that, as I mentioned, this is happening, the full moon is exact at 9:12 p.m. Pacific time. So that already puts the exactness of the full moon at 11:12 a.m. No, 12:12 a.m. on the 28th for those on Eastern time. And so, and that's 4:12 a.m. Universal time. Astronomically, this is a really deep partial eclipse. It's listed as a partial eclipse, but it's 93% of the moon's diameter is going to be covered. So it's going to be visible, across much of North and South America, as well as parts of Europe and Africa. I know for Pacific time zone where I am, moonrise is going to be about when it's going to be start to be visible. And, because it's a 93% partial eclipse, it very well and absolutely might look like a total lunar eclipse because there's just 7% that's not covered. And so it's probably going to be as big and beautiful as most total lunar eclipses. And so, I think that let's remember, this is a full moon in Pisces. And that means that the sun is in direct opposition to the moon. And so the sun is in Virgo. So we have that Virgo Pisces axis that I was talking about. And so Virgo is saying and inviting us to really tend to what is present. And, you know, Pisces is inviting and reminding us that that it might be okay for us to lean into, open up to discover what we cannot see and to trust the things that have yet to unfold. So on the one hand, Virgo wants us to discern, maybe even to try to figure it out. And Pisces is inviting us to surrender. And, I think that because this is an eclipse, these themes can become amplified. And because this is a lunar eclipse, something might be reaching completion or realization. It might be an emotional pattern or just an old expectation or kind of um I think about the collective thought forms that are out there that even if we don't necessarily directly espouse and agree with something that is a long held belief in the collective, that we might be impacted by it. We might just assume it's true because we've always been told it's true, and it's just what everybody thinks is true. Those types of patterns, they might be emotional, they might be psychological, they might be some other kind of pattern. Um, there's something that might be ready for revision, release, and planting a new seed that is upgraded. And, but I also want to say that I don't think that eclipses, I like to talk about them as lifting us up and out of linear space and time. That is absolutely true. But this isn't something to be forced, and this is something that it might unfold over the next 6 months of time. So we're not trying to manufacture anything here. We don't need to create a big, uh, you know, exclamation point moment if one isn't there. there might be something that happens like that, but the impact of an eclipse can absolutely be an exclamation point, but that impact might unfold over 6 months. And the impact, we don't want an exclamation point in our lives for 6 months. Maybe we look back in 6 months and we feel the exclamation point is kind of more like, I think, the universal experience for all humans with eclipses. So, I guess I just want to say that we don't have to sit down on the night of the eclipse and decide what we're going to dramatically let go of, because Lisa said that, not even what I said, because that's just what the eclipse dictates. I think sometimes life reveals that for us, and eclipses and the energies of the stars that are impacting us right now. And I would just kind of say on this eclipse day, just pay attention to what might feel like it's complete, or pay attention to if there's something that's emotionally charged that might just feel like it's bristling, and you kind of know on some level that it doesn't really serve you optimally. And also, it doesn't mean we have to make a big exclamation point on how we deal with it. We can, but we have a lot of choices here. And I kind of just want to point to the astrology that's surrounding this eclipse, because this makes this even more interesting. In the early hours of this day on the 27th, Mercury in Virgo is going to quincunx both Pluto and Neptune. And well, I already talked about the quincunxes of Pluto and Neptune the day before. But this time, instead of the sun quincunxing Pluto and Neptune, and that's just need for adjustment, let's remember. Now we have Mercury. So these outer planets are honing in on our physical world here, right? And so this is kind of repeating the same territory that the sun traveled through yesterday. So whatever we might have been feeling is going to enter into our mental field. And we may be trying to understand something that doesn't yet have a clean answer. But then in the afternoon, Sun and Mercury are going to meet in Virgo. They're going to conjoin, and this can bring a moment of illumination. Something might click into place, something might become visible, and that conjunction is happening exactly on the day of the eclipse. It's been operational for a little bit of time beyond that. And so we might find language for something that we've been experiencing, but then Mercury is also going to form a semi-square with Venus, and that's going to remind us that, you know, intellectual clarity doesn't necessarily mean emotional simplicity. Just because we can, you know, understand something doesn't mean that we don't need to feel it. We can know that a chapter is coming to a close, and we can still really have heartfelt appreciation for what it contained and how it served us. To the deep dive podcast, and I'll put a link to the gathering I did with the rituals and the chart information, so you can see how this eclipse impacts you personally. But I guess the question that I'd like to say, that might carry us through the evening of the 27th, as that full moon is visible, at least in the North and South of Americas and Europe, is, what might have completed its work in my life? What's already complete? We don't have to force it. We might just look around and say what's already complete and acknowledge it. Let's move on to Friday, August 28th. The eclipse kind of technically reaches a maximum during the overnight hours, as I was mentioning. And I almost feel like the pattern might break here after the eclipse. And I'm saying that because Mercury is going to square Uranus on Friday, right after the eclipse. And then Venus is going to form a sesquiquadrate with Uranus on Friday. And then the sun's going to square Uranus. So Uranus is a planet of the lightning bolt of change and revolution and instantaneous type stuff, right? Like revelation, revolution, downloads instantly. That's Uranus is active 3 times on Friday. So that's a lot of Uranus. And I guess I would just say, coming right after the eclipse, I would pay attention, because Uranus disrupts patterns. And, the other thing that we can say about Uranus is it introduces information that we might not expect, and that information can often awaken and liberate. So Mercury square Uranus Let's talk about each of these three things. Mercury square Uranus might bring some sudden ideas for us, some conversations, some news, some mental field realizations. Sun square Uranus, so squares are challenges that present themselves because they're helping us correct the course or move something that might have been a roadblock. So when the sun is squaring Uranus, this may make us acutely aware that we've outgrown something. So those themes about the eclipse are totally still in play. Of course, the hours after the eclipse, but this is where there might be this realization. And then Venus square Uranus, Venus rules Libra and Taurus. So it's balance and karma and even reciprocity. So that might be about relationships. It might be about values and money. It might just be about being able to live in harmony with each other. So there may be some restlessness today, I'll just say, because Uranus is so active. Plans might change, something unexpected might enter the picture, is kind of, I guess, what I would say. But I would say the neat thing about astrology is, so now we know it's coming. So instead of assuming that disruption means something's gone wrong, stay curious because Uranus is known, the lightning bolt of change, reminding us that we are the high technology that we seek. It gives us an opening that we couldn't create ourselves. And this is why I think the astrology of Friday is really fascinating following the eclipse, because, maybe yesterday the eclipse asked what is complete, and today invites us into the question of, like what becomes possible when we're no longer holding on to it. There's the realization of completion, and then there's the energetic beholding to the truth of that. The week closes on Sunday, August 29th, and this is a day of, I think, kind of finding a new rhythm. The sun is going to be semi-square to both Venus and Mercury, and oh no, the sun is going to be semi-square to Venus, excuse me. And then Saturn is going to be biquintile to Mercury. So this is kind of cool because after the Uranian lightning bolt of change, and maybe even disruption is a strong word in our collective right now, but I don't mean disruption for chaos. I mean disruption for a higher purpose. But today, Saturn's going to help us put things into their place. Perhaps not exactly as they were, though, right? And that's important because, integration isn't about restoring the old order. We're not simply trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again right now. We're discovering a new order. We're discovering a new creation. And I think that Mercury and Saturn can help us organize what we've learned in traversing this last week. So maybe there's a practical decision to make. Maybe there's a conversation we want to have. Maybe there's a boundary we want to clarify. Maybe also there's a commitment that we want to say, I'm ready. I'm here for it. I'm doing this. And with the sun and Venus, there's a little tension with the sun and Venus, and we may acknowledge that not every choice is going to be pleasing to everybody. And that's okay. That's okay. Virgo season is asking us to become increasingly discerning about where our life force goes. Our life force is the juju. It's the good stuff. It's the thing that is valuable on this planet across lifetimes, but especially now. And so not everything deserves our attention or equal attention, and not every invitation deserves an emphatic yes. And also, not every habit that we might have, I think this is maybe the easier one for us to think about. Not every habit that we've been carrying needs to come with us into the next season of our lives, interpersonally and personally. So I guess before I get to well, no, I'm going to get to the larger story. So this week kind of, I think, completes the eclipse package, where the Leo solar eclipse was, as I mentioned, saying what really wants to be born and birthed and expressed authentically through me, especially through my heart. The Pisces lunar eclipse is inviting a different question, and that's, what must be released so that a seed can be nourished. And let's remember that I lightly talked about how this is a lunar eclipse, which is always about realization and release, but it's a North Node eclipse, and that's about why our soul's here and where we're headed. So release the heavy rocks out of the backpack so that we can get the seeds out of our pocket and be able to plant them in the ground. And I think Virgo season, and now we're in Virgo season also. So this is going to give us a way to begin answering that question of this eclipse through kind of the day-to-day aspects of our life. Virgo is informing our habits, our bodies, our schedules, what we do when no one's looking. And let's also remember that it's about our relationship with the earth. So I think, the movement of this week feels like we're kind of going to be grounding and listening, moving into discernment and surrender. And then we're going to get some liberation and integration. And I think that final word matters a lot, integration, because eclipse season, as we know, is absolutely not finished when eclipse season ends. We have 6 months to unpack these energies and to really digest is not quite the right word, but to work with and to integrate, I think is the right word. Integration, as I was saying. And so I guess I just want to say, if you want to work with the eclipse, I want to make sure that you join my email list because I just finished the second of two eclipse gatherings. We talked about using herbs. We talked about making tea and making incense. We talked about ritual. We also talked about how we can start to understand and unpack how these individual eclipses might impact us personally. All that's recorded. It's part of something that is a membership that I usually keep behind closed doors monetarily. I am opening it up during eclipse season. I'm also inviting you, if you feel so called, to join me. I do this every new moon and full moon. And, I guess I'll just say also that, I keep thinking about late summer here in the Northern Hemisphere as I look at this week's astrology because on the farm here, this is the time of the year where the garden really begins telling the truth. Some of the plants here are already done harvesting. They've produced abundantly. Some of them still need some pruning. Some of them are still about ready to be harvested. And, some simply want to be composted and returned to the earth. And I really feel like as I look around, there's no failure in any of it. It's simply the season. And that's kind of a different way of looking at it for me versus the way that I feel like I was trained by the what I'm calling the collective, right? Because we're used to jumping through the hoops and making the scores and getting the stars, and that is checking the boxes is why we are worthy, for example, right? And so I think that this eclipse and this season of our collective is also about inviting ourselves grace. That word grace, it's a pretty powerful word. There are things in our lives that are still growing. There are things in our lives that are ready to be harvested. And there are also things in our lives that are asking to be tended to. And there are things in our lives that the season has ended. And I think that it's all good. It's all part of a bigger picture. And I think this Pisces eclipse reminds us that we don't have to cling to every chapter simply because it maybe once really, really mattered to us. That is still a part of us. Just because we're letting it go doesn't mean it completely ceases to exist in our energetic field especially if we are grateful for it, right? And I think that Virgo is absolutely, because it's so attentive to detail and it's almost a very energetic hygiene sign. Virgo knows that release creates space for something else. And Virgo is infusing it with intentional care. So I think this week, perhaps, our practice isn't to ask just what should I get rid of, as if it's trash day and we just got to throw a bunch of stuff out. I think it's really good for us to be mindful what's already completed its season. I mentioned that already in this offering. So listen with your heart, and I want to say that you might already know the answer. Have a blessed week. I'm grateful for you. Bright blessings and so much love.